He opened the door at the sound of iron shoes striking the wooden step of the stable. An Apache girl leaned against the porch post, a broken spearhead lodged in her shoulder, a cloth pouch at her chest seeping blood. They looked at each other, silent as wind caught between wallboards. His hand still carried the old habit, holding the door so it wouldn't swing wide, so the hinges stayed quiet. His back blocked half the frame, as if stopping a word that would be spoken. The metallic tang of blood hung thin between their breaths. Below the step, the wood where the iron had struck still vibrated faintly, like a guitar string dampened by a calloused finger. A strip of dry dirt, scored shallow by someone's heel, stopped at the stone base of the post. The dog in the corner raised its head, did not growl, its tongue brushing a tooth with a faint sound. The broken spear shaft had pierced through buckskin, its grip roughened by long use, the split wood fibers splaying like dry roots. The iron tip was hidden, only the darkened shaft showed, bound with a strip of stained gray cloth. Blood soaked into the pouch at her chest, coarse woven, bound crosswise by a strap, the mouth folded in 3 creases, the top one bent from being thumbed often. He set his hat on the sill, brim touching the floor so it wouldn't fall. His fingertips tested the edge of the door, a habit of checking its fit. Inside, the doorstop nail jutted a little. He pressed it in without looking down. His eyes stayed on her, but the corner of his vision held the axe, the hanging rope, the gun on the wall, out of reach. She said nothing. Her chin lifted slightly to hold her breath steady, a thin tendon showing under the dust. Her hair was matted at the nape, black strands stuck to dried sweat on her cheek. Her lips were cracked, the fissures whitened. A diagonal smear of dirt crossed her nose, as if wiped hastily by the back of a hand. The pouch rose and tightened with her uneven breathing, then eased when she exhaled. A bead of red worked through the cloth and stopped at the edge of a thread. Her left hand lay over it, not to hide, but to pin it in place. Her knuckles were dusted fine, nails chipped and bent from hitting something hard. He had not stepped onto the porch, half his foot still on the packed earth floor inside. Beside his heel, an old boot sole had peeled back, patched with tire rubber, jute twine crossing stretched stitch holes. On the ground, a flattened straw stem lay pale, where it had been stepped on. A fly circled her neck, landed on the dirty bandage, then left. She didn't brush it away, her eyes fixed on his, pupils narrowed. The rim of her ear was dusted like powdered stone, specked with dull flecks. He swallowed, but the sound caught. Only his Adam's apple shifted. His shirt moved. Porch beam's long crack didn't move. The dog shifted its gaze from the step to her pouch, then to his face. Its tail tapped the low stool once, wood knocking faintly, then stopped. It didn't approach. It knew when not to. A fresh scrape marked the post at her hip, raw wood not yet darkened. The hitch rope on the left post hung loose, loop knot untied, the twist careless. Its end had frayed against the step, grit caught in the fibers. He tilted his head slightly to see past her into the yard. No figures, just rough ground with a few fine scratches pointing toward the porch, their edges blurred by wind. On the stall rail, the wooden saddle hook had been left askew, jutting like an awkward finger. She shifted her shoulder just enough to make the spear shaft quiver. He saw the strain in her neck, her hand tighten. A new line of sweat appeared at her temple, then dried. If the pouch fell, it would strike the shaft. The strap would slide across her collarbone. He thought of it like weighing a hay bale before hanging it. Inside, a bowl on the table slid slightly where he'd bumped the edge. Beside it, an old water jug bore a white crust around the neck, the rim marked from the last dry lip drink. A rag lay on the chair, one corner dark, as if from wiping soft pitch. Wind brought dust and the scent of long-dried fur. The hem of her shirt trembled without folding, damp with blood. He lifted his own hem slightly, gauging the reach if he had to move. His shoulder turned, wrist bent, the stance of someone ready to lift a weight in one jerk, not cradle it. Above his head, the gun on the wall stayed still, muzzle toward the small window. No one looked at it. The rope beside it was coiled tight, end tucked in as by someone who disliked dangling ends. Everything was in place, except her. She blinked, first time since he opened the door. A short, dry blink, like something overdue. Old tears rimmed her eyes white. Her throat jerked with a caught breath. He extended his right hand, stopping midway. From there, a half step more, and he would touch the pouch's edge. A half step back, and the door would close, latch set. The house returned to order. A small stone rolled once beside his heel, then tipped onto its side. Her shirt smelled of road dust and sap. The tear at her shoulder had been knotted clumsily before, a thread of uneven color, a stray hair caught in it. On her wrist, a thin leather loop was scratched, one mark like a tooth bite. His lips parted as if to speak a name, but he didn't. He exhaled slowly through his nose. In that breath was the echo of times he hadn't called, hadn't been in time, to pass if they bowed, not to. The dog turned away, muzzle to paw, breathing out long. Metal sounded faintly in the distance, not a bell, not a chain. One beat, then gone, like someone setting something down softly. He didn't turn toward it. He looked at her wrist, where the pulse was weak, skin thin, a small purple bruise from long pressure. She shifted weight to her right leg, left knee bent. Her black shoe's toe scraped the step, leaving a faint line. The pouch rose slightly, then stilled. He heard his own heartbeat change, but kept his hand on the door. The stillness thickened, like dust left unswept. He, she, and the pouch, three things bound by an unseen cord. If one fell, the others would follow, each its own way. He knew that kind of fall. So did she. No one had to say it. He bent slowly, took his hat from the sill, set it back inside a step. That small move cleared space for his other hand, if he needed it later. She followed the hat's path with her eyes, softening for a fraction, then hardening again. At the porch edge, a drop of red fell from the pouch and broke into a leaf-shaped stain. It soaked in before the wood could swell. The grain drank, leaving a dotted rim. He glanced at it like at a mark carved long ago, unread, just noted. The door stayed in his hand. Half the house was behind him, in its old order. Ahead, the winded porch and a stranger. He stood at the threshold like a man guarding a well cover he would not lift. No one moved. No one stepped back. Only the iron shoes struck the wood a second time, soft, like a question without a name. He shifted, hooked her good arm over his elbow as if lifting a wet bundle of hay. His heel met the packed earth of the stall, softer, damper than the porch floor. He didn't carry, he steadied, letting her weight hold itself. The empty stall had long settled straw, old horse smell in the boards. The low stall door creaked softly when he pushed it. The latch was a thin, bowed iron bar, hammer-scarred. He lifted it, slid it into place with a small click. She leaned on the wall, chin tipped, the spear wound darkening her shirt further. The pouch stayed against her chest, strap cutting a faint line across her collarbone. Her fingers didn't grip hard, but each short breath pressed her palm deeper into its edge. Her nails were dirty, some whitened at the tips from splits. He pulled the tin basin from the corner, set it under the makeshift wooden spout, fitted from an old bamboo tube. He twisted the cloth plug at its end. Basin. The cold bit into his joints. Mud, dust, and red streaks broke apart into gray swirls around his wrists before sinking. In the basin's bottom, something hard tapped his fingertip. He pinched it between two fingers, brought it close. A small brass fragment, no bigger than a hook eye, edge bitten away, carrying the dull sheen of something long kept in sweat. He rolled it between thumb and forefinger. One side bore evenly cut notches, not natural. The smell of metal mixed with pale blood. He set the brass piece on the wall shelf where he usually kept old horseshoes. It lay there without a sound. He looked at the bandage he'd removed. Inside its weave was a small tear made by something hard. The threads had pulled into a loose strand. A black hair stuck to it. He didn't check where the brass had come from in the tear. He only noted this: the old bandage had once been pinned by metal, and whoever wrapped it hadn't removed it. The dog lay outside the stall door, chin on its forelegs, eyes following his hand instead of the stranger. It licked the edge of its nose once, then set its head down again, ears still upright. The bridle hanging on the post tapped once in the wind, then fell still. He tipped the basin, letting the pale red water run into the packed straw. He filled it again, dipped a clean rag, wrung it until it no longer dripped. He came back to the stall door, leaving a board's width between them. She turned her shoulder for him without moving her hand from the pouch. The wound opened and closed with her breathing, its edges uneven, bleeding little but steady. He said nothing. He pressed the rag once against the blood near her shoulder, lifted it, shifted to the other edge. The new red spread into a thin leaf shape on the cloth. In the stall's corner, the old saddle hook sat slightly askew, its tip scratched. He looked from it to the door latch. The latch fit tight, the receiver blackened by years of hands. He touched it with a fingertip. It felt sticky, like stove soot. She drew a deeper breath, small as a rope sliding through a dusty pulley. The pouch swelled with it, then eased. Her eyes drifted toward the basin. He lifted the worn bandage, thinking to fold it in layers. Its frayed edge shed horizontal threads. The tear where the brass had been sat open like a dry fish's mouth. He measured it against the wound, not to match, just to know where the first seep would show. He slid the bandage over her shoulder, pulled it crosswise, around her back and forward again, careful to avoid the pouch. The strap caught slightly. She jerked it free without looking down. Her hand returned to the pouch, firmer than before. The basin water now held the color of weak tea. Small bubbles clung to the rim as he washed his hands again. A bit of dry dirt mixed with blood spun twice before sinking. He met her eyes briefly, gauging her awareness. She answered with proof she was still there. On the stall wall, a spider crossed a crack, stopping in the latch's shadow. Its silk drifted, touched the bridle tail, made it sway, then stop. He adjusted the latch, the iron edge clicked against his nail. He rolled the old bandage into a wad, wrapped it in another torn cloth, tied it with twine. As he squeezed, the brass piece on the shelf rolled once to the edge. He tucked it into the wad, meaning to carry it away. Then he stopped, took it back out, replaced it on the shelf. The reason couldn't be put into words. It was the habit of keeping a sign until you knew what it meant. She eased her shoulder from the wall, testing her stance. Her heels sank into the packed earth, leaving two inverted U-prints. He saw them and remembered others, an even trail back when there was a second horse in this stall. He thought no further. He offered a thin leather strap to secure the bandage. She didn't take it, her hand still on the pouch. He looped it behind her, fastened it in front with a simple clasp. The click sounded like closing an empty drawer. His cuff brushed the pouch's edge. He pulled back as from heat. She watched, eyes unchanged. The dog shifted, stood, shook dust into the dim air. It paced halfway around, stopped 2 steps from the stall, sniffed, sat. Its tail struck the ground 3 times evenly. It looked up at him, as if waiting for a command it didn't hear anymore. He carried the basin out, emptied it again, returned with fresh water. This time he set it just inside the stall door, far enough for her to see without stepping. She looked, her gaze lowered to the water level, lingered longer there than on him. The surface trembled to her breath, not the wind. The brass piece on the shelf caught the splash of dull water, glinting like a dead fish's eye. He picked it up, pressed it briefly against the new bandage to feel its edge, then set it back. The mix of brass scent and old salve in the rag made his throat itch. He didn't cough. He swallowed. This time the sound passed clean through his throat. At the doorway the latch still barred. He set his palm on it, controlling it like one might a coat flap before stepping outside. His other hand hung open at his side. She tilted her head slightly, letting a strand of hair fall from her temple. It landed on the white bandage, stuck there. Silence closed tight, like a lid fitted to a jar. Outside, a straw stalk popped up and fell again as the barn cat crossed the yard. It didn't enter. It knew blood scent, knew where not to go. He glanced after it, then let it go. He eased the latch half a notch, tested the bar with his palm. Solid. The solidity wasn't to lock, only to mark the line. In, out, person, thing, house, stall. She was on the stall's side. He was on the house's. The pouch was hers, under her hand. Everything was in its place except the brass piece. It still had none. He stepped back, basin between them. She kept her hand on the pouch. His fingers trembled slightly from the cold water, not yet from anything else. He breathed into his dry palm, the warmth brushing rough knuckles. Then he turned halfway like a man ready to go on with the next task in a familiar list. But he didn't move on. He stayed a moment longer, listening for anything breaking the silence. Nothing. Only the basin water clouding around a single fine hair, spinning slowly before it sank. He left the stall, went straight into the house. The gun on the wall hung in its place, the strap worn into a narrow groove. He took it down, balanced it along his arm, eyed down the barrel like looking through an old stick. He didn't check its load. He wiped it once with his shirt hem, then hung it a notch higher, out of reach for anyone standing close to the ground. The strap tightened on the hook with a dry sound. Beside it, the wooden saddle hook was still crooked. He straightened it, gave it a half-turn to bite into the wood. The old saddle stood in the corner, leather blistered, a mouse gnaw mark in the pad's edge. He slid a hand into the girth strap, lifted it clear, shook straw dust down in a pale ring. A few wood beetles scattered with a faint rustle. He reset the saddle, straightened the stirrup leathers, smoothed the seat, tightened the loose buckle, tested the stirrup strap, its fibers long, hairy like old rope ends. He hung it on the newly fixed hook, level, its tail not jutting out any more. In the kitchen, ash long cooled had hardened pale at the stove mouth. The black pot hung on its rack, bottom ringed with a faint white crust. He touched the stove wall, cold. The kettle sat askew, soot dusted his nail like powder. On the floor, an old grease patch had set firm, edged green with mold. The coal grate bore a long crack without fresh ash to fill it. The thong that held the coal tongs was stiff. When bent, it gave a thin sound like wind against a barrel lid. He opened the back door, stepped down to the ground. His own horse's hoofprints trailed toward the dry well, round marks worn at the edges from use. Over them lay another set, with nails set off center from the frog, side holes uneven. The new prints sank deeper at the toe, shallower at the heel, like a horse throwing weight forward before stopping. The toes faced straight to the porch, not the stall. Moist grit clung to the edges. When he touched it lightly, it stayed together like damp cornmeal. Along the porch edge ran a fresh scrape in the grain, like a bridle rope dragged when pulled from the post, leaving pale wood dust. The hitch post bore a smooth patch at hand height, brighter than the rest. The loop knot in the tie rope wasn't his. It was a quick pull slip knot, released with a single jerk. He lifted the rope's earth between the yard and the porch, lay two small black spots, a stride apart, faint iron scent. He bent, scraped at them with a fingernail. The dark had soaked in, could not be lifted. He brought his finger to his nose, did not smell, only let the scent pass close along the bridge before letting it go, as if to remember without naming it. Wind crossed the dry basin floor, pushing bits of rotted leaves to scuff against the step's edge. The dog came slowly from the stall doorway, nosed a hoofprint, then drew back, licking the fur on its chest once without a sound. It walked to the porch foot, sniffed the stripe of wood dust, then turned its head toward him. Its tail leveled, did not wag.
He propped the wooden bucket beside the dry well. Its rope was worn. The splice at the handle's ring split and frayed, reinforced with an extra twist of fiber, not his work, wrapped opposite the way this place did. He teased a loose strand at the edge of the wrap, smelled sun-dried leather mixed with another's sweat. He set it back as it was, made no correction. Inside, he hung his hat on the peg by the door, brim facing in instead of out. His hand rose to touch the gun strap he'd adjusted. The reset hook was solid. He stepped back to see. The barrel tilted just above the small window's frame. If someone vaulted the wall, they'd meet the muzzle before the stock. He fixed the image in his head so he wouldn't have to check again later. He turned to the saddle. The left stirrup strap carried a smear of dried mud and a winding streak, the kind from sticky clay at the exposed creek bank, where few people went. He picked at it with a nail. It flaked away in a thin plate. Underneath, the leather was cracked like a bird's foot, the edges whitening. He hooked the strap onto its peg to keep it from swaying. The peg's rust clicked faintly, then stilled. In the kitchen, the salt jar's lid sat ajar. White grains fused into a lump in one corner. On the table, a bowl lay tilted, its rim dried with a pale pink trace of something thinned. He set it flat, turning the rim inward as if to put away something shown at the wrong time. The stove mouth stayed black. No one had lit it. He stood at the kitchen threshold, looking to the porch. The hoofprints pointed in a single, unwavering direction. That direction matched the once crooked saddle hook. It had been straightened. The prints remained. No one had swept them. No one needed to pretend they weren't there. He walked toward the barn, stopping by the old post where horses were washed down. A small tub lay overturned beside it, long unused. Inside, a water line clung yellow against the sides. On its rim was a fresh diagonal fingernail scratch, not his. He scored crosswise, never slanted. He touched it once, then let it be. His hand still held the dry soot smell from wiping the stove, grit in the creases. Returning inside, he glanced through the stall door's gap. She still
leaned, the bandage tight around her shoulder, pouch under her hand unmoved. Her cheekbones were bloodless, lips closed. The dog sat 2 paces away, eyes shifting between his hand and her pouch. No one spoke. He tapped the latch head once with a fingernail. Muted iron sound, like checking the beat of something not visible. He looped back into the house, took the kitchen cloth from the door peg, wiped the table's watermark into a streak. Salt grains crackled in the cloth. He shook it lightly out on the porch. Stove dust spread in a thin cloud, drifted, then vanished. The hoofprints in the dirt darkened under the settling dust, standing out like writing on rough paper. He stood at the porch house line, fingertips on the door's old edge mark. Inside, cold ash, cold pot, wind asleep in the chimney. Outside, hoof points aimed at the house, a tie rope knotted by another hand. The gun on the wall hung higher. The saddle had been squared. Everything stood in place, telling what could not be said. His throat felt dry. He swallowed without sound. There was nothing more, only the silence thickening, filling the spaces between those signs like unseen groundwater. He took the small-nosed pliers from the table leg peg, slid cloth under her shoulder so it wouldn't scrape the wood grain. His other hand braced beneath her shoulder blade, thumb set against the soft edge of the wound. "Breathe out," he said, just loud enough, as one might to a calf caught in thorns. She closed her eyes, Her dry lashes caught once, her hand still on the pouch. He eased the broken shaft, testing its line. Resin seeped from the old grain, sharp-smelling. The break was bound in sennet, stained dark from old sweat. Each twist drew the womb's edge in, then let it out. He stopped, shifted the pliers, drew back an inch, pushed half in again, seeking the channel. Her breath came shallow, throat quivering on a soundless beat. Eyes shut. The iron tip lay shallow. He felt it in the pliers' catch against metal. He held, jerked clean, with the rhythm of a man pulling nails from a plank. The tip came free with a dark strip of fabric from inside her shirt, falling into his palm like a misplaced tool. Blood welled a small ring, then settled, tracking down the shoulder into the crook of her elbow. He pressed clean cloth there with 2 fingers, counting slow in his head like pacing a stall. She opened her mouth for air. The breath struck the wall and stopped. He set both shaft and tip on the cracked workbench. Rock, but by intent. Its point bore a dark red speck, fresh enough to look like rust meeting blood. He laid tip and shaft end to end, a straight that would never rejoin. She shifted her shoulder to press the cloth into place, deliberate. Her hand on the pouch stayed. The vein under the skin drew tight. At her wrist the dark leather band was blistered and cracked like a thirsty horse's tail. He glanced, then checked the pad. Blood now turned dark, wet but not flowing. The new bandage had drawn it evenly. He looked at the trident mark again, longer. One outer tine was offset half a grain from the stem's axis. Not careless work, but meant to break pattern. The grinding left rough, horizontal lines. The stone had been soft. He scraped a nail along it. Fine powder clung like coal dust. He wet his nail with his tongue, a miner's habit, and let it go, not swallowing. The silent taste bit at his gums with a dull sting. He wrapped another band crosswise, pulling it behind her back, locking it in front. The clasp caught clean. She half opened her eyes, looking past his shoulder to the basin. Its surface trembled, not to wind, but to her pulse. A blood drop cooling on his hand turned tacky. He wiped it on the old cloth, leaving a leaf-shaped smear. On the table, tip and shaft lay aligned, the trident toward the viewer. He turned it to face the wall like turning an eye away. The dog exhaled hard at the threshold, claws tapping once as it shifted to lie again. It did not enter. It waited. He gathered the pulled shirt threads, tight, rasping in his fingers, rolled them into the dirty rag. The small brass piece from earlier still sat on the wall shelf, lodged there like a stone in a shoe. Not painful, but never forgotten. His gaze went from brass to trident to pouch, 3 points on a single diagonal in his mind, needing no line drawn. She lowered the pouch strap half a notch so the cloth edge wouldn't rub the wound. Her forefinger slipped under, lifted once, let it drop. It stayed still. Her hand returned. The thumb bore a long diagonal scrape, whitened. She didn't look at it, only at the water in the basin. He took the iron clamp, tried it against the wood at the trident mark. Its bite held. The grain was tight, the kind miners used for short, replaceable shafts, cheap and sweat-proof. Wear on the left-hand grip was deeper. The wielder was left-handed. He set the clamp back, laid it crosswise over the tip like 2 dry bones. The tool roll's knot was tied double. He tested it. Secure. She parted her lips as if to speak a word. It fell back into her throat, vanished. Instead came a breath through her nose, fine as hair scraping a comb. He gave the slightest nod, not agreeing, only confirming he heard. No other word came. From the porch roof, dust in the house. The gun hung higher by a notch. On the table, the filed trident faced the wall. In the basin, Clear water now held a single short hair, circling slow toward the rim. He changed the pad again, using drier cloth, altering the pull so it wouldn't reopen. She stood without leaning. Her shadow on the wall shifted just enough for the light to touch half the shaft on the table. He slid it fully into shadow, out of sight. His hand left it, fingers hanging, middle one brushing a button, and stayed. Both stayed silent. The silence was like a lid, fitted tight on a barrel, not a breath leaking. Inside it, exactly 3 small sounds. Water in the basin touching its rim, the dog's nose shifting with a faint snort, and the newly straightened saddle hook breathing out a thin wood creak with the change in temperature. Once those passed, there was nothing left to hear, only the fact to remember that the mark had been filed, not because it was ugly, but because it needed to lose its trace. He and she both knew that, each in their own way, without saying. Hoofbeats thickened on the trail outside, unhurried, each step pressing as if testing the soil's give. The dog lifted its head, did not bark. It only turned toward the porch, ears lowered a notch, tail leveled. He stood at the doorhouse line, his hand still on the old groove, index finger touching the worn seam. 2 riders came up to the porch, their horses breathing damp plumes through their noses. White foam strings from their jaws fell and snapped on the ground. Both wore dark, heavy cloth. At the wrists, dark smudges like ore dust. Yet their stirrup leathers were tied with practiced precision, girths neat, the tail straps marked with fine, straight numbering cuts. On the left saddle of the lead man hung a thin leather bag, mouth cinched with a drawstring, the pull a notched wooden toggle. The one behind, dismounted, stepped onto the porch and set a broken brass ring on the plank, tight against a split in the wood. Only 3/4 of the ring remained, the break saw-toothed, the inner face darkened from long rub against leather, the outer face lined with even tally marks, as if once used for counting. He withdrew his hand, brushed dust from his coat hem with the back of his fingers. Neither man looked into the house. One studied his boot tips, to the porch, like a nail let go, then lay still. He added nothing. The lead man eased his reins so the horse shifted its weight, an iron shoe clicking dry against the step. The man in the doorway didn't bend to pick it up, nor did he answer right away. His hand left the groove, dropped beside his thigh, palm open. The dog glanced at the ring, licked its lip, sat straighter. Inside, the bowl on the table stayed in place, the gun still hung on the wall 1 notch higher. In the stall, the latch was shut. The man on the porch nudged the ring in another inch with his toe, as if to settle it in place. The plank edge it touched bore an old, shallow dent, enough for the ring to fit flush. He noticed the hemp rope hanging by the post, nodded slightly, said nothing. The lead man ran 2 fingers down his glove's seam, flicked fine dust from the stitching, still not looking inside. The man at the door studied the ring. On one break edge clung a thin soot-black layer uncleaned. On the opposite, the brass was polished from frequent touch, like something hung from a leather strap, not worn on a wrist. The even tally marks on its outer face stopped at the break, a beat missing. Such marks were foreign here. Locals counted with beads, not by scoring a ring. In the stall she stood still. Her breath shortened, pouch under her hand swelling once then easing, not touching the bandage. He heard the basin's water tap the side, once, then stop. He raised his chin half a degree, enough to sight past the lead man's shoulder over the saddle's tail. The bag's drawstring was knotted in reverse, a method unlike the salt trader's tie. Their hitch knot on the post was a quick-release slide knot. A fly came and landed on the ring's edge, rubbed its forelegs and lifted away. The man on the porch followed it instantly with his eyes, a habit of one who'd sat guarding a mine gate reading small movements. His lip rose a fraction in the sun, not a smile. The lead man shifted to rub his horse's neck, thumb tracing a vein under thin skin. The horse twitched an ear, stayed quiet. The man at the door bent, not to pick it up, but to hear his own knee brush dry cloth. He pressed 2 fingers to the plank beside the ring, once, as if testing its rot. It was sound. Sound enough not to hold anyone, but to hold a word if he had to stand here long. They waited. He waited too. Under the porch, wind moved through, making the indoor saddle rope touch its hook, a faint note. No one moved at it. The porchman glanced at the road's dust pillar, then at the sharp-edged hollow in the ring's break. The lead man took from his coat a quarter-folded oil paper scrap, unopened, holding it like an unturned card. The man at the door straightened, his gaze traveling from ring to unfamiliar shoe nails, to the thin leather bag in the left saddle. Its strap bore from the mountains. They'd ridden up from where salt and cartridges changed hands. The lead man spoke again. Same single line, same flat tone, same breath. If anyone stops here, tell him we're looking for a lost brass piece. No name, no question. He stroked the horse once more, then backed at a half step, clearing porch space, as if to leave the ring alone. The man at the door nodded, not in agreement, only to mark he'd heard. His hand left the plank, reached back through the door to touch the saddle rope inside. It was cold. In the stall, her breathing slowed by a single beat, no more. The dog shifted its eyes from the ring to his hand, then to the visitor's hitch post. It did not rise. The riders turned their horses without spur. The dust behind them held its height, then blew sideways, as if from a push at the flank. The broken ring stayed on the step, the fracture facing in, the arc toward the yard. He didn't touch it. He only looked at the tally marks ending at the break, like a count cut short. No other words. No one looked inside, start to finish. When the hoofbeats faded, he stepped into the kitchen, opened the stove door, tilted the iron inward a notch. She stood at the stall threshold, hand still on the pouch. He didn't go to the porch for the ring. She passed him, short step, guarding her shoulder, bent, and with the edge of her hand, flipped the broken brass into the cold coals. It hit old ash first, slid, and came to rest on black chunks. He fed in a little rotted wood, tipped a bundle of dry tinder from the old bucket. The fire caught slow, from the edges, red as a closed wound. Brass met heat, cracked once, sharp, like snapping a hoof tip. The break gaped a hair wider. A thread of soot rose, acrid, not high, more like smoke crawling the stove's hood. The metallic burn clung to the thatch through the vent hole, binding like fine resin, spreading slow. He covered half his face, not from heat, from the stove dust. She stared at the ring, unblinking. The bandage on her shoulder deepened at its lower edge, but didn't spread fast. He took the coal tongs, gripped the ring's edge, not lifting, only turning it halfway, letting the even tally marks on the outer face sink into the red bed. Near the break, tiny blisters formed, then sank like fat in a pan. Inside, the leather-worn groove darkened, the smell of scorched hide rising. Among the coal pops was a faint crack, like a grain of sand breaking. That was the thinnest brass, drawing tight, revealing a dent where the tallies ended. She bit a split lip, lightly, made no sound. On the table edge, its black smear like a half-written word. She took a stick from nearby, held it to the ring without striking, just to hear the muted touch of metal on heat. He lowered it an inch, touching exactly at the break's edge. The stick slid, leaving a fresh gleam. In that gleam was a tally line cut off mid-count. The mark had stopped at the break. The fire licked the brass edge once more, a red line running its arc, then dying. He drew the stove door half-closed, letting air through so the fire wouldn't choke. The metal scent caught at his throat. He swallowed it down. She brushed sweat from her temple with the back of her good hand. The other stayed on the pouch. A short hair stuck to her shoulder bandage, curled from the heat, shrinking like a fresh blade of grass under flame. On the work table, the broken spear shaft still faced its trident mark to the wall. The iron tip lay parallel, still. The small brass piece he'd set on the shelf earlier caught a dull flicker from the stove, wavering in the heat. He looked from that glow to the ring in the fire. Same metal, different use. One had been pressed into a bandage, the other for counting. No name needed. Both knew they spoke of the same place. She drew her hand back from the stove mouth when the smell of burning leather rose sharp. Her thumb brushed the soot along the door's edge, coming away black. She didn't wipe it. The fingertip kept that black mark like a small, dry scorch. He shut the stove door another notch, so the next crack, if there was one, would pass through iron before escaping. No more sound came. Only the noise of coals collapsing inward, separating, taking up space. After a while, the ring sagged completely, like a crusted loaf burned at the rim. The tally marks had lost their edges, the rim gone soft, the count erased. He pushed it deeper, burying part under the new ash, letting soot settle over it like dirty snow. He didn't look at her. She didn't look at him. Each fixed their eyes on a different edge of the same thing. The smell of metal climbed with the thin smoke toward the thatch, lodging in it. He knew it would linger longer than people did. She knew burning it wouldn't erase its scent from the nose of someone used to breathing soot. Both stayed silent. The silence laid over the kitchen like a tight, heavy iron lid. Out on the porch, the old dust had settled, but on the step remained the hollow where the ring had sat, a circle missing a piece, untouched. The wind faded behind the thatch eaves. In the stall, a rope strung across the post had been pulled, leaving a dark diagonal streak in the grain, fresh, still damp with sweat. The knot from before was shifted half an inch, the end frayed into a few new short strands. He touched the streak, dragged his finger back, coming away black like wet the wooden bar from where it leaned, like a broken stick. One end was worn flat from years in the door brackets. The other carried the dog's old tooth marks. He set it across the frame, braced it into the sockets, pressing in until wood met wood with a closed, dull knock. The brace wasn't meant to keep someone in. It was a way to set his shoulder between two unnamed sounds outside. The dog didn't bark. It lay belly flat, forelegs straight, ears up like temporary nails. Its eyes were black and shiny, fixed on something not visible. Its breath came short through the nose, no scent voiced. He went to the yard for the sand bucket, long set against the wall. Its rim was cracked, the rope handle stiff. He tipped it, spreading sand over the hoofprints before the porch. It fell in a line, filling the deep arcs at the toes and the shallow at the heels. At each drop, sand mounded the print's edge, then sank, slow, like groundwater swallowing letters. He pressed it flat with the side of his foot, not too smooth, leaving a few scales of grit out of place. Enough to cover, not enough to hide. By the hitch post, a small hemp cord hidden in the dirt hole showed its end, yanked up earlier. He pressed it down with his heel, not all the way, leaving a bit showing like an old thorn. On the porch step, the hollow where the brass ring had been stayed. A half circle, half break. He left it. That was for remembering. Someone had set something down and gone. He looked through the stall's latch gap. She still stood, hand on the pouch, shoulder wrapped, the cloth's edge dark as wet soil. Her breath didn't strike a sound, only made the basin's water ring once and go still. The curl, singed from the stove heat, lay across the bandage like a scrap snare cord. Back outside, he spread more sand along the path to the dry well. Each handful left his palm evenly, like measuring salt. The strange shoe-nails' marks at the path's edge filled under the grit, leaving only an angled tip like a slip in someone's writing. At the turn, he dragged a heel line, like an old cart track nicking the road, then stopped. The dog rose and followed 2 steps behind, stopped, lay again, ears still up. In the house, the gun still hung a notch higher. The saddle rope was still. In the kitchen, the stove was cooling, mouth ajar like an unfinished drink. The soot smell clung to the thatch, slow to move, like someone's passing still in the air. He touched the door brace again, testing the set. It didn't shift. That shook creased, staring at the space between brace and floor. It heard what he didn't, or remembered what he hadn't yet. He held out a hand for it to sniff, still smelling of dry sand and cooling stove. It licked once, quiet. On the stall post, the dark streak from the rope pull remained, not fully dry. He took an old rag, wiped once straight across, not back and forth. The mark lightened but didn't vanish. The grain drank it like skin drinks salt. He hung the rag back on the nail, a thread of dirty water falling to the floor's groove and vanishing. He pulled the kitchen window half closed, so the frame fit snug and blocked the stall from road view. A small crack in the frame took a dry straw. He wedged it in to stop drafts. The straw broke with a tiny snap. When all was done, all sound stopped, except the dog's tongue brushing teeth now and then, and a late grain of sand dropping on the porch plank, bouncing once, lying still. He rested his palm on the brace, thumb whitening then fading. Behind the door, everything kept its place: rope, shoulder bandage, pouch, basin. In front, sand had leveled the tracks. No road left for strangers to read, only one for silence to pass. In the stall, a body swayed from the beam, neck in its own horse rope. Old hemp, the quick-slide knot from the porch hitch, now drawn all the way to a small loop at the throat. Each short swing shook dust from the beam like spilled salt. At his feet, the boots still carried dry mud at the heels, the sticky kind from the creek edge, marking 2 mottled spirals on the packed floor. Between them lay an empty leather bag, mouth gaping, brass clasp sprung, tongue bent as if pried on a step edge. The strap twisted, its inner face holding a single salt crystal crust, breaking under his shoe's nudge. Nothing inside, only the smell of hide and a stranger's hand. By the stall door was a new gouge climbing from hip height to above the chest, a gasp in wood that stopped at the latch ledge. A boot heel mark crooked below, like someone had stood reaching, then slipped. On the beam Where the rope passed, the grain was worn bright, sign the line had pulled through more than once before tightening. The man hung face up, tongue behind teeth, eyes open, pupils wide, fixed on the thatches dark. His hat had fallen into the empty trough, brim crushed, crown bent. His belt hung one hole loose. That hole bore a fresh cut, the length of a grain of rice, edges still sharp, as if a thin blade had tested it to slip the buckle. The dog lay just outside, head between stove, now dry and cracked like a seed shell. The other hand pressed to the dirt, fingers spread. The middle finger held a thin scratch, half a knuckle long, blood turned brown. She looked at the knot at his neck, not his eyes. He stood by the brace, his hand curved around the wood, not lifting it. His eyes traveled, from the throat loop to the wall gouge, to the empty bag, to the boots, back to the beam. His breath made no sound. On the wall shelf, the small brass piece still lay, rolled half a notch by the sway, stopping at the edge like a stone in a shoe. The rope wasn't from here. Hemp braided against the local twist, splice sealed with black resin instead of a knot. Just under the loop, a polished patch showed where a hand had gripped once before letting go, exact length of a man's palm. On the floor, a saddle hook lay 2 spans from the bag, its tip clinging to a thin horsehair, its tail carrying fresh wood dust. He stepped twice, skirting the hanging shadow so dust wouldn't fall into his eyes, and touched the brass clasp with his index finger. It was loose, the latch hole stretched oval, the inner edge nicked by a blade. At the bag's rim, the salt crust was rough. When he flicked it, it broke like scattered sugar. From the strap came the heat of another's hand, sun and sweat still there. She pulled her hand back from the stove's mouth as the smell of burning hide surged. Her thumb touched the soot mark at the stove's edge, blackened. She did not wipe it. The fingertip kept that black mark as if it were a small, dry burn. He pushed the stove door 1 notch tighter, so the next crack, if any, would have to pass through steel before escaping. No more sound came, only the soft collapse of coals, breaking apart, settling. After a while, the ring sagged completely like a scorched, edged cake. The cuts were no longer sharp. The rim softened, lost its count. He nudged it deeper, burying part under a layer of fresh ash, letting soot cover it like dirty snow. He did not look at her. She did not look at him. Each kept their eyes on a different edge of the same thing. The smell of metal drifted with the thin smoke up to the straw roof and stayed. He knew it would linger longer than people. She knew burning would not erase its trace from the nose of someone used to soot. Both stayed silent. The silence sat over the kitchen like a fitted iron lid, heavy, tight. Outside on the porch, the old dust lay flat, but on the wooden step was the hollow mark where the ring once lay, a circle missing a piece, uncovered. The wind eased behind the straw roof. In the barn, the rope stretched across the post had been dragged, leaving a dark diagonal streak across the grain, fresh, still damp with human sweat. The knot before it had shifted half a notch, the rope's end frayed with a few more short strands. He touched the dark streak, post's edge, leaving a poor, ownerless mark. He brought the wooden bar to the door, still leaning against the wall like a broken stick. One end had been worn flat from many times pressing into the bracket. The other bore old teeth marks from the dog. He set it across the frame, fitted it into the brackets, pushed in until wood met wood, hearing the close thud. This bracing was not to lock someone in. It was a way to place a shoulder between 2 unnamed sounds outside. The dog did not bark. It lay with belly pressed to the floor, front legs straight, ears pricked like 2 nails loosely set. Its eyes were black and glossy, fixed on something unseen. Its nose drew short breaths without a sound. He went to the yard. brought the sand bucket that had sat against the wall untouched. The rim was cracked, the handle's rope stiff with wear. He tipped it, scattering sand over the line of hoof prints before the porch. The sand fell in a stream, filling the deep front arcs and the shallow heels. At each drop, the sand spilled over the edge of the print, then slowly sank as if underground water swallowed words. He smoothed with the edge of his foot, not too carefully, leaving a few grains askew like fish scales, enough to cover, not enough to hide. Near the hitching post, a small hemp cord, hidden in a hole of earth, had its end exposed, pulled hard earlier. He pressed it down with his heel, not all the way, leaving a bit poking up like an old thorn. On the porch step, the hollow where the brass ring once sat still sank half round, half broken. He did not fill it. That was to remember. Someone had placed something there and left. He went back in, glanced through the barn latch gap. She still stood, hand over the cloth bag, shoulder wrapped, the band's edge dark like damp soil. Her breathing made no sound, only stirred the basin's water into one small ripple that settled again. A curl, shrunk by stove heat, lay slanted on the bandage like a scrap of snare wire. Back in the yard, he scattered more sand along the path to the dry well. Each handful left his palm evenly, like measuring salt. Strange horseshoe nails at the path's edge vanished under new sand, leaving only a slanted corner like a slip of handwriting. At the bend, he dragged his heel in a diagonal, like a wagon's old wheel had brushed past, then stopped. The dog rose, followed him 2 steps, stopped, lay down, ears still up. Inside, the rifle on the wall was still a notch too high. The saddle strap did not sway. In the kitchen, the stove had cooled, turned it toward the wall. The turn was so small even dust would not notice, but it told him. Something had tried to hook here once and failed. The dog moved 2 more steps, stopping at the doorway's edge. It sat, brow creased, staring at the space between the bar and the floor. It heard what he could not, or remembered what he had not yet. He offered his hand. It smelled of dry sand and cold stove. It licked once, silent. On the barn post, the dark rope mark remained, not fully dry. He took an old rag, rubbed once, no back and forth. The mark lightened, but stayed. The wood drank color like skin drinks salt. He hung the rag back on the nail, letting a thin, dirty trickle drop into the dirt groove and vanish. He slid the kitchen window half shut, letting the frame fit snug into the gap, blocking the barn from road view. Beside the frame, a small crack. He stuffed it with dry straw, blocking wind. The straw snapped in 2, breaking clean. When all was done, every sound stopped, only the dog's tongue sometimes touching its teeth as it breathed softly, and a late grain of sand dropping to the porch, bouncing once, lying still. He pressed his palm to the bar, thumb whitening, then fading. Behind the door, everything stayed in place. Rope, bandage, bag, basin. Before the door, sand had leveled the tracks. No road left for strangers to read, only a road for silence to pass. In the barn, a body swayed from the beam, neck caught by his own horse rope. The rope was old hemp braid. The end had a sliding knot, same quick tie seen at the porch post, now pulled all the way to one side, cinched small on the neck. Each short swing shook dust from the beam like salt falling. Below his feet, boots still held dry mud on the heels. the sticky kind from the lip of an exposed seam, pressed into two speckled spirals in the packed earth. Between them lay an empty leather satchel, mouth wide, brass clasp sprung, tongue bent as if pried with the edge of the porch step. Its strap twisted. Inside edge held a white salt crystal that broke when he tapped it with his boot toe. Nothing inside, only leather smell and a stranger's hands. Near the barn door, a fresh scratch on the wood ran from hip height past chest, its rhythm fading, stopping abruptly at the latch ledge. Boot heels scuffed below, as if someone had stood straining, then slid. On the beam, where the rope looped, the groove was deep, the grain worn bright, showing the rope had slid many times before locking. He hung face up, tongue behind teeth, eyes open, pupils wide, staring in face. Its tail did not touch ground. She sat against the wall in the beam's shadow, not leaning on the post. The bandage on her shoulder darkened at one edge, not bleeding further. Her good hand rested on the cloth bag, index finger still bearing the black soot mark from earlier, now dry, cracked like a seed's shell. The other hand lay palm down on the dirt, fingers spread, a fine scratch on the middle finger, half a joint long, blood-dried brown. She watched the loop on his neck, not his eyes. He stood by the door bar, hand curved around the wood, not removing it. His eyes made a slow round, from a noose to the scratch on the wall to the satchel to the boots, back to the beam. His breath made no sound. On the wall shelf, the small brass piece still lay, rolled half a notch by vibration, stopping at the edge like a pebble in a shoe. The horse rope was not from this place, braid reversed from local habit, joint sealed with black resin instead of a knot. Just below the loop at the neck was a polished mark, where a hand had gripped and pulled once before letting go, exactly palm length for a man. On the ground, a saddle hook lay 2 spans from the satchel, its tip holding a fine horsehair, its tail dusted with fresh wood powder. He stepped closer, avoiding the swaying shadow to keep dust from his eyes, touched the brass clasp with one finger. The clasp was loose, latch hole oval. Inside edge bore knife marks. On the satchel's rim the salt crust was coarse. When he flicked it, it broke like sprinkled sugar. The heat of a stranger's hand still rose from the strap, sun and sweat. From the mouth of the alley the ground trembled as if someone with heavy steps was walking along a long plank. Dust clung to the rim of the water basin in a thin edge, falling inside with each vibration. The water's surface quivered without wind. The dog raised its head, ears shifting angle, nose touching the doorframe, then stayed still. He walked straight to the wooden peg where the second saddle hung. Dry leather gave off the smell of old sun. Bits of straw shifted away when he shook it lightly. The right stirrup strap was stuck in a shrunken hole. He twisted the pin, kneading the leather until it softened enough to pass through. The girth strap was pulled out, the cord scraping with a dry sound, the buckle clicking neatly into the next notch. He smoothed the saddle's flank strap, fingers running over birdfoot cracks, stopping at an old broken stitch, once tied with a craftsman's knot. The horse outside snorted, shifted legs, its hoof striking the yard boards in a beat that echoed into the doorway like someone tapping fingers on a barrel's rim. On the porch step, grains of sand fell one by one without hurry. A brass piece on the wall shelf shifted half a hair's width from the faint tremor, then bandage, pressing it for the right hold. The strap of the pouch on her chest moved half a joint. She set it back in place. Her eyes stayed on the pine leaves laid on the table. The folded one in the middle kept its shape, 3 small dents resting silent, like nails driven, but not struck. He jerked the drawstring that bound the breastplate cover, checking the bite of the hook lock. One small tack on the saddle board was loose, He pressed it flat with his thumb, enough to last through the ride. The collar strap was tugged twice, giving a faint rasp. Holding, he swung the saddle onto his shoulder, set it on a lower peg so the next lift would be clear. In the yard, dust moved evenly like breath. On the basin's rim, the ring of water grew larger, then split in two, rolling into the gap between someone's toes resting nearby. The dog shifted one front paw, scratching a very short mark, then froze. It did not howl. She pulled an extra tie from the lower edge of the bandage, wrapping it once more around her back, fastening it at the front with a small brass clasp. The clasp's edge was scratched, paint flaked, an old mark where a hand once slipped. She laid the back of her hand over the folded pine leaf, holding it steady against the table in case the house shook. The soot streak on her forefinger had dried to ash gray, cracking in a single line across. He adjusted the left stirrup strap, threading it through the latch caught, the metal's clipped sound swallowed into wood. He tested the spare rein knot, it slid a joint's length, returned smooth. The saddle's noseplate was rough from rat bites. He shaved one edge with the knife tip, then stopped. The stall door bar was in the same place, set tight. The latch did not rattle with the ground's pulse. Only a small beetle, lost on the wood surface, turned in circles from catching the wrong scent of soot. The spear's shaft faced the wall. The iron head lay parallel. The half-round notch in the door sill remained split, half-rounded, half-sharp. Outside, the hoof rhythm changed. 2, pause, 1, short. Dust under the basin's edge layered, a new rim over the old, making 2 uneven lines. On the ridge beam, 2 bits of straw fell, stood upright like pins, then toppled. She tied her hair back with the thin leather cord from her wrist, twisting it twice, tucking the end into the loop. The cord's edge was torn, biting into the old crease to make a doubled mark. Her back stayed straight, shoulders not leaning. Her breath was short, steady. The water in the basin stopped trembling. He set the saddle on the bony back of the horse, tightening the girth until it caught on the ribline. The horse dipped, breathed shallow into the wood. On the edge of one leaf, a half-drop leaned toward a newer corner, its metal still untainted by skin. She shifted weight between her feet, so the bandage gripped the wound tight. The pouch strap did not shift. He hooked an empty saddlebag onto the rear loop, tested its sway, a soft thud, enough to hear. The cross strap was threaded, tied in a dead knot, loose ends tucked inside so they wouldn't dangle. Sweat at the edge of his brow soaked into the hatband's faded line, not falling. Outside, no voices, only hooves. Dust hung level with the eaves for a moment, slid over the fence, fell to the steps in a fine coat. The dog lifted its left front paw half a joint, held it in the air, then set it back in the exact same spot. Its tongue was dry in its mouth. She touched the folded leaf, tapping the first dent lightly, not to call anyone, just to mark it again. He turned his head briefly toward the table, nodding a fraction. The collar strap stayed still. On the wall, the gun was still a joint above reach. Its hanging strap did not sway. The brass piece on the shelf hadn't fallen. The half-round notch was empty. The tarp in the yard did not flap. The ground's pulse skipped once, then returned steady. He laid his hand on the horse's flank, counting how many beats of held fear lay in its skin. She tightened the bandage knot again, locking it at the center of her chest. The clasp turned backward so it wouldn't snag the pouch strap. Her eyes stayed on the leaf. No words, only objects in their places. Leather drawn to fit the hand, buckles seated firm, dust holding at one level, water in the basin stilled. The ground's tremor ran through the wall, into the bones of a hand, into the straps and saddle, stopping in the space between them, where the line on the pine leaf had already joined to some unnamed work. He reached for the iron pliers hanging by the stove, their jaws stained with old soot. On the table, the folded pine leaf lay in the center, 3 dents facing him. He lifted one from the edge, the one with the tilted half-drop, with his fingernail, so the edge wouldn't slip into the rest. The sound of metal touching metal was small, like sand scratching a bowl, then deep red, its border blurring by a hair. She did not blink. On her shoulder wrap, the salt line showed sharper from the steam. A drop from his temple fell to the hard-packed floor, striking a grain of sand that rolled half a turn, then stopped. A sound as small as a dry seed's crack. On the basin's rim, a ripple formed, then settled. The brass piece on the shelf did not move. He held the leaf at one height, hand locking the plier's neck, forefinger braced on the handle so no tremor passed to the edge. The red crept into the line, lifting out tiny black flecks, half-burned carving dust drifting slow like gnats in smoke. The metal's taste bit into his gums, filling his nose. He eased his shoulders back, keeping the arm balanced, eyes avoiding her face. A fine, bright thread bloomed at the tip of the half-drop, ran the length of a matchstick, then died. The leaf's edge curled just enough for the red to catch on a thin film of light. He stepped half a pace closer, not reaching, to set the heat exactly on the carving. His breath locked in his chest, slipped out through the nose, short, silent. She tilted her head a fraction, eyes moving from the pliers to the stove's mouth, brushing past the folded leaf, then resting at the crossing point between the table's gap and the line on the second leaf. Her forefinger, still marked with dry soot, tightened once on the pouch mouth, as if reminding the thread in a seam to pull tighter. The iron spearhead and broken handle on the table stayed mute, as if facing the wall. The stall door bar didn't creak. The half-round notch at the sill stayed empty. The tarp outside didn't stir, the wind having gone elsewhere. The red edged one more grain into the line, stopping at the deepest cut. The thin rim, like chaff shells, seemed ready to drop. He stayed still, counting inside, like a man leading a horse over a narrow bridge. Sweat from his hairline soaked down his neck, running along his spine, vanishing into his shirt. The smell of scorched leather from the plier's grip laced into the metal scent, light as an unopened message. He drew the leaf out very slowly, holding it sideways at the stove's mouth so the heat would fade evenly. The color slid from red to brown, then to ash. The carved line remained, but dimmed by half a hair's breadth. The half-drop kept its tilted head. He touched the edge with a fingernail. Light sting. Burn without blister. She didn't move. He closed the stove door one notch, pressing his thumb to the steel so a layer of dust caught on his skin. The pliers lay along the stove bottom, letting it lie alone, touching nothing else. The drawstring pulled tight, the grooved wooden bead exhaling a dry click. Back inside, he stopped right at the table's edge. The fold was still there, 3 pegs pressed into the wood. The stove mouth shut, soot on the fireband, black and whole. The dog turned its head toward the saddlebag, then lay down, chin on its forelegs. He didn't speak, the tongue in his mouth dry as pressed salt. Adam's apple moved, no sound. His eyes went from the fold to the door, up to the wall, where the gun hung one notch higher, then to her hand holding the bag. He pulled the saddlebag closer to the hook, tied a secondary knot into the cross strap, fed the excess end through the buckle slot, hid the tail. The knot's rasp across cut leather was like burning down a coal's edge. She looked for one full second, didn't ask. The moment at the stove mouth had just passed, leaving the taste of metal on skin, a sweat streak on the floor, and a very small gap in the counting line on the leaves, small enough only for someone who had held them to know. He turned half a shoulder, set the pliers back exactly on the nail, jaws pointing down. The fold didn't shift. Broken handle and iron tip unchanged. Door sill still missing half a curve, the tarp heavy as stone. In the gap between them, there was no voice. Only the choke just set down, lying flat, like a pine leaf, not yet bagged. He did not burn. He folded each remaining pine leaf from the outer edge inward, each sliding over the other like wet scales. Carved face pressed to smooth back. A thin cord pulled from his pocket, he threaded through the corner hole, yanked once tight, tied a dead knot. The fold in the middle sank into a thin bundle. 3 indent marks sank as if nails had just been driven. He tilted the tabletop lightly, checking the last leaf hadn't slipped into a crack. Metal sound muted. A small brass piece on the bench still lay to one side, never in the bundle. He clamped the pine bundle in his hand, turned the carved face inward, slid it straight into the saddlebag on the bony horse's back. Bag mouth closed. Drawstring caught on a wooden notch. He added a cross loop, double tightened, the knot hidden inside the strap belly so it wouldn't swing. The saddlebag sagged down, heavier than a palm's weight. He shook it twice, tiny thuds, audible but not calling. Loose strap end threaded through the buckle slot, lying flush with the leather. Cross strap caught again, second knot over the first. The doubled rope hugging the mouth tight. The horse shifted feet, exhaled, iron tip parallel. The water pan settled clear to the bottom. The brown dust ring at the rim dried into a border. The door bar still fit snug. The half-round notch in the sill empty. No sound. Only the wind slipping through the leather hung on the wall. The old windbreak, puffing it, making it tap the wood with a hollow beat, then fall still. The soot smell still clung under the roof, pressing on the shoulders like a damp coat. She stood by the table, hand still on the cloth bag, now lighter by a part. Her index finger, still streaked with soot, pinched the bag mouth once, let go. The shoulder band tightened over the wound, white salt edge showing clear. Her eyes passed over the saddlebag, didn't stop on him. At the sill, a small knife was stuck halfway in, Wooden handle turned outward, a mark already decided. The blade bit the sill's grain clean, new wood color showing pale, the handle worn with grip patterns from long use, not his color. Wind struck. Handle trembled slightly, stilled. He touched 2 fingers to the knife handle. Didn't pull. The wood's grip on steel just enough to hold it standing. The half-round notch under the knife was empty, like an unfinished sentence. The dog glanced at the knife, then the saddlebag, then lay flat with its head toward the door, not breathing loud. He checked the double knot once more, thumb pressing the join, so rope bit into rope. Dry fiber rasped under the nail bed. Sweat darkened the leather grain of the saddle deeper by 1 ring. The saddlebag stayed quiet. The small brass piece on the bench still in place, not bagged. A hard grit to press underfoot when walking. She pulled the hair tie from her head, looped it once tighter. The frayed end bit exactly into an old crease, making a double mark. Shoulders squared. Her eyes skipped him, landed on the knife handle at the sill. A bead of sight guarding the door. Wind shoved the leather on the wall a second time, thudding into the planks. A sound not deep, not long. 3 bits of straw fell onto the table, landed in the gray dust mark where the pine leaves had been, crumbling under his fingertip when he brushed them away. The floor stayed dry, the house's sound held. He tilted his chin slightly toward the sill, as if fixing in memory the knife handle's direction outward. Then he turned back to the horse, pulled the strap once more. The clasp caught, didn't spring. The saddlebag heavy enough to feel on the knife at the sill, stuck halfway with handle outward. The dog stood at the threshold, didn't follow. It looked down at the half-round notch, then turned its head into the house's shadow. The horse walked slow, saddle snug, rear bag sagging, double straps biting into each other, knot tucked neat. Each step, a small thud under the saddle leather, then still. She sat loose behind, hand gripping the pommel, shoulder band hugging the wound, cloth bag flatter by a part hanging at her side. At the first fork, he gathered stray stones, stacked a low column. Flat stones at the base, edge stones above, top surface level as a table. Beside the old marker's base, a mossed stone sat slanted. He scraped the earth with his heel edge, made a shallow groove, shifted that stone a hand's width aside, just enough for its shadow to fall away from the path in use. He tamped the earth twice, heel keeping rhythm, not smoothing fully so the edge still looked torn by wind. The new stone column stood exactly at the track's edge, blocking the sightline down to the hollow ground, a path leading into the underground spring. On the top stone's face, he smeared a thin patch of dry mud, then scored it with a diagonal line, enough for someone to mistake it as a trail sign. She led the horse past the edge, didn't ask. The shoulder band tightened another notch, salt edging bright with breath. The horse's nose dipped to the bent grass, released a dry stalk. Sweat dust on its neck darkened into spots. Past a bare rock point, the road bent slight. He picked a dry branch, swept across the hoof marks to merge 2 lines into one, blurring the nails, leaving only direction. A thorn tip pricked his finger. He pulled it out, blood beading once, then gone. Down in the gully, an old wagon track turned wrong toward a sand slope. The track pressed deep at the start, then broke off among scattered rocks, as if someone had turned sharp or abandoned it. He stood at the gully's rim, watching that track long with the eyes of someone who had pushed a barrel over such a slope. He dug at the track's head, wedged in 2 small stones, raising a lip half a finger high, so the next wheel to follow would bite here harder. Wind threaded the gully mouth, carrying the scent of old foam and dry moss. She leaned her hip against the saddle, exhaled short, eyes fixed on the far bank. Bag strap unmoved, band not loose. He placed 1 more stone on the new column, turned its flat face to point exactly at the wrong turn. The column's shadow fell across the old track, swallowing the start of the descent. Grass under that shadow flattened by his heel, paler than the rest. On the next sand patch, he dragged a bush branch across the road once. The leaves left parallel streaks like wind tails, enough to blind a hurried eye without erasing the old groove. His boot hit someone reading in haste. They crossed the open flat at an angle, avoiding loose rock. Rear saddlebag clear of the horse's hip, double straps holding true. Dust rose, fell. No sound followed. At a broken wooden stake marker, he reversed the stake, turning the split face toward the thick grass. Strangers would see the whole side and let their eyes pass. Stake tip bruised like bone gnawed, resin dried dark in spots. She tilted to check the band's knot, pulled 1 more time, clasp sitting right at the breastbone center, mouth corner still. Her good hand touched the pommel, left it rested on her thigh, fingers folded, index still soot-colored. Below the second gully, the wheel track split in 2 and lost itself, boot prints pushing in between as if testing the bank. Sand surface pitted with tiny black specks. Ore dust, like from the stove soot. He sat, scooped a handful, let it fall slow. Heavy grains dropped early, light ones drifted with the wind. This road had once been scouted by mine hands. He rose, shifted another small moss stones aside, just enough for the new track's head to bite into soft sand, leading others into a dead hill's back. Their horses' hoofprints overlapped the old track just once, then veered away, like someone carefully avoiding a puddle. The new stone column stood behind them, low, still. The old wheel track turned wrong, pressed deep, then broke among gravel. No one called, no running marks. Only the earth swallowing letters like groundwater swallowing sound. A stretch of road just wrenched out of joint without a tooth clicking. On the steep sand slope the wind turned, then went still. From the opposite bank the sound of metal echoed, chain clanging, hook scraping against an iron frame. The sound cut short, as if swallowed in dust. Black dust mixed with tiny bright grains drifted in the air, touching the horse's neck and scratching a dry line. He pulled the saddlebag toward himself, loosened the secondary knot by a fraction, slipped a finger into the bottom and pulled out a metal blade. A blade not quite half a drop in shape, edges still sharp, the hole's rim worn from string. The leather of the bag scraped faintly against the blade. The bag's body sagged, then held still. He fastened the knot back in place, tucking the end into the belly of the doubled cord. Ahead, a rock hollow gaped between sunken grass, rimmed with pale dry moss. He held the blade between thumb and forefinger, pressed it flat, and let go. The blade fell without turning, struck the bottom with a dull thud as if dropped into thick water, no echo. She sat still in the saddle, her hand on the reins, fingers pressed tight, not pulling. Stopped abruptly. The sound veered right, dropped over a gravel spur, went silent. The horse's nostrils foamed white, spat out a grain of black sand, flicked away with its lips. He picked up a flat pebble, dropped it after the blade. The pebble's fall was drier. Hit an edge, bounced twice, faintly, then vanished. He leaned in to listen, his neck catching one notch, his shoulders returned to place. No wind rose from below. She inched forward half an inch, hand on the reins, tightening half a joint, then letting go. Her eyes swept over the crust of salt on the hollow's wall, paused for a second at the smooth streak left by old, seeping water, now dry. No words. He rubbed a fingertip on the hollow's rim, a thin coat of black powder clinging to skin, the oar's chill biting the back of his tongue. He shook his hand once, the grains dropping onto the trampled grass. The saddlebag behind stayed still. The doubled knot bit into itself. The loose end didn't slide. The chain shifted again. The hook struck a nailhead with a hollower sound. No solid rock beneath. Dust rose a span high, then fell, coating the back of his hand with an ash-gray color. She drew a short breath, set her soot-marked index finger on the reine's head, tapped once. A clear enough sign. He nodded slightly, turned the horse's head toward the dark slope. No one spoke. The blade's sound lay buried, the chain's noise across the way, settling in the dust. The sand slope breathed once, heavy. Her hand held the reins as if pressing down. His eyes left the hollow just as the last black grain fell to the rim and was gone. At the mouth of a narrow pass, the two walls pinched together like elbows pressed in. The wind slipped through as a thin hiss, sand crawling low over the ground. The far end of the pass darkened half a step, the throat of the way splitting into two channels, one climbing loose rubble, one sliding down into sand laced with black pebbles. He pulled the saddlebag toward the light, loosened the secondary knot just enough. His fingers slid to the bottom, touched the edge of one blade, then another. The metal touched leather with a faint rustle. He took out two thin blades, set them crosswise on a flat, dark stone. He bent the first blade over his knee and snapped it. The break came crisp, the edge fanning sharp like a fresh shell fracture. The newly broken edge sliced across his index finger, a straight line. Blood welled slightly, ran into the carved notch like water finding a crack. The shallow dimple at the corner filled halfway with red. He turned his finger upward, letting the blood dry fast in the wind. No wiping, no bandage. The red mark stayed in the groove like ink drawn offline. The second blade he bent on the stone's edge, braced one end, pressed down clean. The fragment flew without sound, stuck corner showing. The remaining edge was pitted with black grains, old carving dust, clinging stubbornly to blood from his finger. He threw one half up the loose slope. The metal hit a crystal of stone once, then slid away into the grit. The other he threw into the sand bed with black pebbles, the point lodging slanted like a stray boundary stake, the glint lasting a moment before dying in the dust. She did not stop him. She threaded an extra girth on the thin horse, pulled a spare leather strap from the saddle hook, passed it under the belly, set it into a hole unused for long, the hole's rim torn, the old mark biting into a new notch. She gave it a sharp pull, the girth hugging the ribs tighter, the leather rasped dry. Her fingers caught the buckle, pressed it shut, without looking at him. The horse flinched its belly, breathed shallow, held. Its eye's corner reflected the pass's mouth, a thin dark line. The doubled cord on the saddlebag didn't slide. The tucked end lay flush with the leather. He cinched the bag's knot back to its old notch. The smell of cold metal mixed with salt from his skin rose, biting into his gums. The cut finger brushed the trouser seam, leaving a brown streak. The streak's head stopped at an old stitch line. On the rock by the wall, the wind's sweep cleared new sand to reveal a stubborn black grain, fine ore, same shade as the soot on her bandage. He flecked it lightly with the knife tip. The grain fell without sound. She tested the girth one more notch. The horse's back dropped a fraction. Its nostrils let out a long breath without froth. The reins lay easy in hand. The bandage's upper edge dried further, its salt rim catching a pale light. He picked up a leftover shard no larger than a fingernail, still sticky with blood, rubbed it on the stone in a short circle to kill the shine, then flicked it into the dust. The sound died under the wind. 2 paths were marked now, one in rolling grit, one in sinking sand. The pass's mouth pressed down the sound. No hoofbeats, no people. Only a single red bead still sitting in the dimple of the earlier broken blade, filling the hole just flush, not spilling. The wind passed, taking no scent. She let go of the girth buckle, left her hand resting on the saddle tree for one empty beat, then lifted it away. He rolled his shoulders, took the lead rope. The pass ahead narrowed by a hand's breadth, enough for 2 people to pass, not enough for a voice to carry through. Dust settled along the fence's edge, afternoon shrinking under the curved tin roof. A flatbed wagon from the mine turned in the empty yard before the exchange post. Empty wooden box, lid tied with slack jute, dangling rope, brushing the axle with a short clunk each turn. Bone, doubled cord, ends tucked. She sat hunched, shoulder bandaged tight, cloth bag partly flattened against her hip. Inside the low stilt house, the scaled table sat askew. The post owner poured salt from a sack into a tin basin, scooped with a small shovel, tamped it flat, lifted the beam a notch. Salt grains spilled over the rim, catching a dull light before dying on the boards. At the next table, an open wooden box held bullets stacked like seeds, tips greened from hand sweat, shells clicking softly when touching. A man bit his lip, held out a half-marked metal shard, the broken edge jagged, the half-carved line ending right at the rim. He lifted it to the light, smiled on one side, called it a charm. The man beside him flicked a nail, caught it, turned it over, blew the dust, tied it loosely on a neck cord, like a cheap talisman. The carved mark no one read. They read the odd numbers on the scale beam. He rested his hand on the fence rail, stake points shallow in dry soil, rocking loose when nudged. The stake's head was bruised, its grain scratched dark. On the rim of the empty wagon box, a frayed jute fiber caught on a nail, the rope looping half around, then falling. The kind of tie used by someone returning an empty box without cargo. She dismounted, hid her shoulder in the stake's shadow, held the reins low. Her eyes passed over the shard in the man's hand, paused briefly at the half mark, then moved on. The bandage on her shoulder was dull, the salt rim faint like flour stuck from drying meat. At the bullet table, a man rolled a round long between his fingers, counting beats with his nail. Click, click, click. Pre-twisted paper tubes were stuffed with black powder, mouths pinched flat, tucked under a tin lid. No one looked up. No one asked about the rock hollow or the sliding rope in another man's pen. A mouth said, "How much?" A finger answered, "Short 2 tails." Chalk marked a thin line on the board. The wagon turned wide outside the yard, rear wheels scraping rock, squealing short. The empty box's lid thumped in time against the crossbar, the newly tied jute not holding tight. The man with the shard, tied at his neck, counted salt while thumping his chest as if testing luck. The piece struck his sternum, clicking faintly, with no words. He traded a sack of dry bran for a bit of coarse salt, scooped into an old post-cloth bag, tied tight, looped twice to keep from slipping. His eyes did not go to the man's neck. His eyes counted the corner of the saddlebag behind the horse, the doubled knot still holding, the end tucked out of sight. A child held a sliver of metal to his eye, clasp fitting into an old frayed hole, nail pressing shut. Her breath went straight out her nose without sway. Soot-stained fingers brushed lightly over the bridle's headpiece, putting it back exactly where it had been. No questions. An old man gathered bullets into a leather pouch, counting with the palm of his hand, 10, 20, 30, his voice never rising. The man at the brick station added another chalk mark, blew the dust, slid the salt jar aside to make room. The smell of black powder, sweat, and salt mixed like a thin smoke without wind. He did not step into the shadow of the roof, standing off the edge of the sunlight, his shadow cast over an empty wheel. His eyes read the numbers in bullets and salt, not in charms. His hand tightened the horse's rope by one notch. The saddlebag fit snugly against the flank, making no sound. When the freight wagon turned onto the road, the lid struck the rim once, the hemp rope shooting a thin puff of dust. The metal sliver with the half-notch swung on the door hook, barely moving. No one looked up. No one mentioned the old matter. One man counted salt, one counted bullets. The ledger got new lines scratched over old ones. Outside the fence, a gaunt horse's tail swept a thin circle of dust, then stood still. At the alley's edge, a strange horse was tied to a post, with a dead knot of hemp rope set low, its tail sweeping a thin ring of dust around its legs. The saddle was foreign style, the leather bag hanging empty, mouth open, drawstring slack, wooden toggle unfastened. Sweat along the mane's edge had dried into speckled white salt. One face of the post showed fresh wood, just turned. The twist had ground into the dirt, leaving a heavy ring, broken where someone's heel had pressed. The rope's knot was wound an extra half loop, its end tucked into a groove to keep it from shifting, the tying style of someone who knew how to leave a sign, not a lodger passing through. Beside the post, on a low slab of stone, was a carved drop of water, freshly scored, not yet worn. White stone dust still clung in a thin rim around the cut, not yet blown away. The top of the drop was flat on one side, skewed from the usual drops seen on pine needles. The stroke went stiff, the blade biting an edge in the way of a hand that had once carved trident marks into a spear shaft. The upper half of the drop held a deep dot the size of a needle tip, set off center, not in the middle. A straw wisp had rolled against the stone's edge, shedding one seed. The wind lifted it just once, not enough to clear the dust. At the drop's rim, 2 dry glove marks rubbed across at an angle, sign of a stranger testing depth, finding the blade took well, then leaving. The hoofprints of the strange horse were deep at the toe, shallow at the heel, its shoe nails turned half a grain off, same as the other set. The bridle was laid over the saddle, locked. The empty saddlebag thumped lightly in the wind, not repeating. The smell of salt and faint iron passed the nose without stopping. A pack cart rolled by, wheels over gravel, rattling soft. The man on it turned his head to look at the horse, glanced at the drop on the stone, and moved on. His hand adjusted his hat, pushed the cart forward. The creak of wood on axle chased the look backward. The white carved mark stayed fresh as lime, unread. At the alley's edge, the dust held for a beat, then fell. The hollow under the cliff wall stayed still. The old footpath turned toward a gravel bank, cut off halfway. The stone pillar beyond cast a cross shadow over the old line, swallowing the head of the path to the underground stream. The strange horse shifted feet, stamped once, nostrils puffing dry foam. The tether rope drew tight slightly, the dead knot not sliding. The saddle grew heavier by a fraction when the wind pushed the empty bag, the bump too small to summon anyone. On the slab, the skewed drop pointed a different way than the horse's nose, two intents not meeting. The deep dot at the drop's head might have been the start point, or the end. The mark gave no direction, only that someone had come and left it. A man carrying salt walked past, his elbow brushing the rope at the post, not turning his head. The drop on the stone didn't call his name. The post stood. The horse stood. The stone dust had not blown away. Farther on, the half-moon notch in someone's doorstep was likely still empty. The soot on another roof still clung. Some saddlebag somewhere still held its exact weight. The pine needles were gone from the old wooden table. Here only a skewed drop stood in their place. People passed, looked, then moved on. No one knew who it was for. No one knew who would read the wrong-edged mark the right way. The wind passed, holding the stone dust at the edge for a moment longer, then letting it fall, grain by grain, like salt. The alley stayed still, the earth swallowed sound. The mark remained. In the end, only a thin layer of dust clung to the bridle, dry salt along the mane, and a skewed-edged drop carved into stone. The things that hurt don't vanish, they change places. From the shoulder into the bandage, from the mouth of the stove into the soot on the roof, from the hand into the hidden doubled knot. The earth still swallows sound. People learn to put things back where they belong and stay silent. Healing here is not loud. It is a basin of water settling clear again. It is a saddle lying flat on the horse's spine, no longer rubbing. It is a stone post turned half a hand's width so the wind strays less. It is a hand that no longer shakes when tied. Some burn it, some keep it. Some snap it in two and throw the halves in different directions, so other roads may live. There is no ready-made right answer. Only the price one is willing to pay, and a silence wide enough for it to rest in. If you want to leave something, don't tell it all. Drop just one sign in the comments, a dot, a half notch, or a skewed drop. Whoever passes will read it their own way, and if you leave nothing, that's fine too, in this land of wind and salt. Silence is also a kind of reply.